The Yellow Admiral by Patrick O'Brien. Read by Robert Hardy. Sir Joseph Blaine, a heavy, yellow-faced man in a suit of grey clothes and a flannel waistcoat, walked down St. James's Street across the park and so to the Admiralty, which he entered from behind, opening the private door with a key, and making his way to the large, shabby room in which he had his official being. He looked over the papers on his desk, nodded, and touched the bell. "If Mr. Needham is in the way, pray show him up," he said to the answering clerk. He half rose as Needham appeared and waved him to a comfortable chair on the other side of the desk. "Having finished with poor Delaney," he said, "we now come to another gentleman of whom we have no news, Dr. Stephen Maturin, perhaps our most valuable adviser on Spanish affairs." "I do not think I've heard his name," said Needham. "I do not suppose you have, yet you and your people have quite certainly found his cipher at the foot of many a cogent report. When he's going up and down in the world on our behalf, as he so often does, he almost invariably sails with Captain Aubrey. You probably know more about the late Duke of Habachstal than I do, the kind of men he privately mixed with, and the creatures he employed for some of his activities. He had conceived a hatred for Maturin, who'd been the death of two of the friends in question, putting an end to their traitorous practices. And the creatures Habachstal employed about his revenge found out that before the Irish Rising of '98, Maturin had been a friend of Lord Edward Fitzgerald, that he'd committed some indiscretions in favour of Irish independence, and that with the help of hired Dublin informers and fresh evidence he might yet be taken up on a capital charge. Furthermore, he'd brought back two transported convicts from Botany Bay before their time and without leave. With such high-placed and influential enmity, I dared not move for fear of making things even worse. Instead, I advised him to withdraw privately to Spain, together with his protégés and his fortune, which was liable to forfeiture on such a charge. This he did, adding his little daughter to the company, not his wife, who happened to be in Ireland. All this, you understand, was before the cruise in the Gulf. A few days before the returning squadron reached Bantry Bay, Habachstal killed himself. Opposition no longer existed, and I at once took the necessary steps, obtaining immediate consent for the pardon. I sent over an express telling him that all was well, and that he might gather his family and wealth as soon as he chose. He came back to England accompanied by his wife, and they both set off by the shortest route, Mrs. Maturin being subject to the seasickness, with the intention of posting down to the Groyne to make arrangements for the transfer of his fortune, all in gold, by the way, to this country, and then of picking up the protégés and the child at Avila. 8 days after he left, we had information from one of our best agents that he'd been denounced to the Spanish government as the prime mover in the Peruvian attempt at declaring themselves independent of Spain. "It very nearly succeeded, according to our information," said Needham. "Very nearly indeed. A matter of a few hours, and we should have been home hands down, but for a prisoner of war who escaped from Aubrey's ship and ran up and down in Lima, calling out that Maturin was a British agent, that the revolution was paid for by English gold. At the last moment the cry was taken up by the French mission, sent there on the same errand, but with inadequate funds, and they made such a noise that the leading general cried off and Maturin had to leave the country." "You denied everything, of course." Sir Joseph bowed. "But it was clear they did not believe us. They clapped an embargo on his money in Corunna, and they meant to seize him when he went to collect it. I sent warnings by 3 several agents and telegraphed Plymouth for the fastest cutter to take a message to our man in Corunna itself. We had a few reports of his passage, chiefly from military intelligence, the last being a dubious account of a wealthy pair with an escort travelling through Aragon in a coach and four. Then nothing. And the Aragon report was geographically improbable, since it would have been right off his route. Then again, although Maturin is an uncommonly wealthy man, he never gives that appearance, being habitually threadbare, and always inconspicuous."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?